From WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington, welcome to the Kojo Nandi Show, connecting your neighborhood with the world. Later in the broadcast, how protests in Ethiopia are spilling over into political activism in the Washington area. But first, federal prosecutors announced last week that they would not be filing charges against former D.C. Mayor Vincent Gray in an investigation into whether the election that put him into office was poisoned by corruption. A local businessman named Jeffrey Thompson admitted in court last year that he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to illegally influence the city's 2010 mayoral race and that Gray knew about it. Just weeks before Gray was up for re-election in the city's 2014 Democratic primary, he lost that race to Muriel Bowser, and there are now questions about whether that primary was ultimately decided by the U.S. Attorney's Office, not the city's voters. Vincent Gray joins us in the studio to reflect on that episode in his political past and what might be in store in his political future. Vincent Gray is the former mayor of the District of Columbia. He's a Democrat who also served as chairman of the D.C. Council, and before that was a member of the council representing Ward 7. Vincent Gray, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kojo. I appreciate you having me on.
It was in March 2014 when then U.S. Attorney Ron Machen announced that Jeff Thompson would be entering into a guilty plea, admitting that he ran a shadow campaign to support your mayoral candidacy in 2010. Machen implicated you in that announcement, indicating that you had detailed knowledge of an illegal scheme run by Thompson. You have maintained the entire time that Thompson's story was a lie and that you did nothing wrong. Now that Machen's successor, Channing Phillips, has announced he will not be filing charges against you, what would you like people to know about what did happen? Can you now speak more freely about your impressions of what happened?
Well, I actually was fairly forthcoming, quite forthcoming along the way. Even though my attorney at times said, you need to slow it down. You need to stop talking about this. My propensity, Kojo, on this was for transparency. I wanted people to know. It's very important to me for people to know who I am, and I realized there were people who did, and a lot of people who didn't. That I'm a person who spent a good part of my life working on behalf of people with disabilities. I went to work then for 4 years as the director of the Department of Human Services. Then I went back to the nonprofit sector to work with children and youth and young adults who are homeless. And I've spent my whole life working on behalf of people. And my reputation was hugely important to me. So my propensity was to speak about that as much as I could. And my attorney would, in his own way, would tell me I needed to slow it down. But I did speak a lot. There were very few questions. There were virtually no questions that I was asked during this ordeal over a period of 4.5 years that ultimately I did not answer. I did interviews. I did a lot in order to help people understand, what happened here as I understood it and what I didn't do.
Now, this aspect of the ordeal is over depending on what you want to do with your political future. It may raise its head again. But now that this aspect of the ordeal is over, there are people who will still ask, but did you not suspect something? Where did you think the money for the luxury SUV you were being taken around in was coming from? Why did you think that Jeffrey Thompson was lending apparently large sums of money to people you know? Why do you think Jeffrey Thompson or whoever was paying Suleiman Brown to launch vigorous attacks on your then opponent, Adrian Fenty? You are a hands-on leader. Were you not ever suspicious?
No, I was not. And first of all, I wasn't taking around in any luxurious SUV either. To put it in context, Kojo, I was the chairman of the council at the time, and the city was really lapsing into some very serious financial difficulty. And the then mayor really wasn't involved in doing anything on that issue from what I could see. I was working very closely with Nat Gandhi, who was the CFO, who as a CFO did an incredibly outstanding job. I was the chairman of the council. We had legislative responsibilities that I had to take care of. There were people who actually said to me, why don't you stop doing that job? You'll never be the chairman again. I said, I can't do that. I was elected to be the chairman of the District of Columbia's council, and I'm going to do that job until I'm not here anymore. I realized by declaring myself as a candidate for mayor that I'm clearly not going to be the chairman after this election is over with, but I have an obligation to do this job as effectively as I possibly can. And frankly, what that led to was me not being as involved with the campaign as I probably should have and could have. I rarely went to the campaign office. We had a second campaign office up on Georgia Avenue that during the entire campaign I only went to twice. I spent my time trying to do my job as chairman of the council, going to all these forums, that were conducted, and try to do the best job I could to make the case as to why I should be the mayor of the District of Columbia and why this was good for people in our city. So, no, I didn't suspect anything. I didn't notice anything at all.
800-433-8850 is the number to call. If you have comments or questions, you can shoot us an email to kojo@wamu.org, a tweet at Kojo Show, or you can go to our website, kojoshow.org, watch the live video stream of this broadcast and ask a question or make a comment there. Number of people who pled guilty to being involved in that illegal campaign were people who you have known for a long time, some of whom you consider friends. Do you feel a certain sense of betrayal by what they did? Do you think they felt they were operating in your best interest and just got carried away?
I think people desperately wanted a change. I think they wanted Adrian Fenty out of office. Again, if I had been there on a regular basis, or if our campaign manager had really dealt with some of these people who were, I don't think he saw anything. He never told me he saw anything. He was there every day. Never saw a thing, according to him. Yeah, I don't want to make excuses for people, but I think people operated out of feeling like there was a vacuum there, and they kind of went off and did their own thing. I had debates with people about our Get Out the Vote effort because ostensibly that's where these resources were devoted to getting out the vote. I couldn't tell you today, if you paid me to tell you, I couldn't tell you where I saw any material difference. I knew people were going to vote. We had a Get Out the Vote effort as a part of our campaign. We had hired somebody specifically to do that. We had hired people to work on making sure that the people who were supporting us got out to vote. So I just didn't see it, Kojo. I didn't see where any of this had any particular impact at all. And so, again, not to make excuses for people, but I really think they felt they knew what needed to be done, and they went and did it. And obviously, it wasn't the right thing in instances of those who pled guilty.
Do you believe that you would still be mayor if then U.S. Attorney Ron Machen did not move forward with the Thompson plea deal when he did?
Absolutely. We called it Machen Monday. And it was the same day as my State of the District speech also. And I was absolutely stunned when he held that press conference around 5 or 5:30 that Monday afternoon. And I had to change parts of my speech in order to address this. And I addressed it then. I've continued to address it since. But I believe there was voter suppression at work in this situation. And the reason why I say that is, look at some of the awards that I especially won in 2010. Let me give you an example. In Ward 7 in 2010, there were 14,800 people who voted in that election. In 2014 in Ward 7, 6,200 people voted in my reelection campaign. Same pattern in Ward 8, same pattern in Ward 5. And I didn't just look at my votes, but I looked at the votes of Fenty, and I looked at the votes of Bowser also. Go to Ward 5. Go on the website of the Board of Elections. And one of the interesting things you will see is that while my votes went down substantially because people didn't show up, they didn't come out to vote, look at the votes. Fenty and Bowser got exactly the same number of votes, 4,431 votes in 2010 and in 2014. So the turnout was low, and the impact was largely on me in terms of that turnout. I think people heard that press conference. They thought I was going to get indicted, and they said, look, I don't want to vote for one of these other people, so I'll just stay home. I won't even bother to vote.
You call it voter suppression, but is it your sense that removing you from office is one of the desired outcomes of the prosecutors running this investigation? Because after all, then U.S. Attorney Ron Machen pointed out that there was a much wider web of corruption that his investigation had unveiled in the city, including 3 former council members going to jail, all kinds of other campaigns in which Mr. Thompson had been involved in corruption, and your campaign. So do you think it was specifically intended to remove you from office?
Look at the results. The results speak for themselves. And that is, there's nothing that's been done in the aftermath of that press conference. That was now, what, 18 or 19 months ago that press conference was held. And I think the term the tip of the iceberg was used. Well, did the iceberg melt somewhere along the way? Where are the results that were purported to exist during that press conference? I said to people when they said in the aftermath, I said, there's a lot more coming. I said, well, really? I said, I don't know what that is, and I still don't know what that is. So, I've heard statements about, well, if I got won the election and then got indicted in the aftermath, they knew whether they had a case or not at that point. Where is the case that emerged in the aftermath of what was done in that press conference? That press conference was absolutely pivotal to that reelection, in my opinion. People just simply didn't show up.
What do you think would have happened had you won the primary and the press conference was held afterwards? Would it, do you think, have affected then the general election?
It might have, but they would have had to produce something. The general election wasn't held then until November. You had from April until November to be able to put a case on the table. And I think people would have demanded it, if especially if he had come out with that after the primary. Now you have me, facing off against the independent, Republican, whoever the candidates were at that stage. I think people would have demanded. I wish people had demanded it anyway. Said, what do you got, Major? Put it on the table. Where is it?
Do you believe you would have beaten Adrian Fenty without whatever help the people behind
Absolutely.
the
I
shadow
don't think there's any
campaign claimed
question.
to have given you?
Kojo, go back and look. Before I got in the race, there were polls that were done. I was ahead in polls that were done even before the race. Whatever was done was completely unnecessary. And frankly, just to add to that, had Mr. Thompson run an independent campaign, which was perfectly legal, the teachers union ran an independent campaign by their own admission, which they said they spent $1 million on. Don Peebles, an outstanding businessman, nationally in the city and nationally, made it clear he was running an independent campaign. He even won an award for the ads that they produced that had nothing to do with me, was not connected to our campaign at all. I did a little research, which I assume if they conducted a thorough investigation, they have to know this too. There apparently were 5 independent campaigns that were run as a part of that election cycle, which is a perfectly legal process. And if Mr. Thompson had done that, that would have been perfectly legal, and we wouldn't have had any of this, and we wouldn't be having this discussion today.
In the wake of all of that, do you now feel that Muriel Bowser's election was legitimate? Is she, in your view, the legitimate?
I think I would have won, period. So maybe we should have a do-over.
Don't think that's going to happen.
No, but I think I'd show up for it. I'd be happy to show up for it. Listen, I look at the condition of our city, Kojo. I look at where our city came during the 4 years that we were there. Despite all of this controversy that was created, our city came light years. When I became the mayor, we were in a financially precarious position. And working with the chief financial officer, we came from having no discretionary dollars left in the District of Columbia. They either were tied up in a bond escrow fund or tied up in a required reserve that was set up by the Congress and imposed upon the city. There wasn't $1 in that fund that we had discretion over. When I left, we had $1.87 billion in the bank. It was the largest reserve the city has ever had. And it may even be higher than that now, because you look at the economic development, which we worked on. You look at the continuation of education reform, which I promised people. During that campaign, if you recall, there was an effort to paint me as somebody who would turn the clock back. I said, that makes absolutely no sense. I was the person who led the legislation. When Fenty introduced the legislation into the council, I led the effort through the council. The biggest disappointment that I had in that situation was that I couldn't get a unanimous vote. There were 2 council members who voted against it. We got a 9-2 vote because there were 2 vacant seats at the time on something that I thought was desperately needed in the District of Columbia. We have the most robust early childhood education program in America at this stage. People are arguing in different states about having full day kindergarten. We have 3 and 4 year olds who go to school now all day, every day, as a result of programs that came from legislation that I did.
You know what you're sounding like? You're sounding like a man who might be running for office again, touting the accomplishments of your administration. If you have comments or questions for Vincent Gray, give us a call, 800-433-8850. He's the former mayor of the District of Columbia. He's a Democrat who also served as chairman of the D.C. Council and a member of the council representing Ward 7. What do you think about the closing of the investigation? What do you think Vincent Gray's future should be? 800-433-8850. I'm Kojo Nandi. Welcome back. Our guest is Vincent Gray, former mayor of the District of Columbia. He's a Democrat who also served as chairman of the D.C. Council, and before that, member of the council representing Ward 7. If you have questions or comments for Mr. Gray, give us a call at 800-433-8850. You can send email to kojo@wamu.org. The current mayor, how did you react to hearing about Fresh Pack, which has since been shut down? Mayor Bowser talked a great deal while she was running about the city needing a fresh start when it came to ethics. The story of this political action committee called into question whether her supporters, if not she herself, were being hypocritical about it.
Well, I thought it was quite hypocritical. She made no bones about calling for my resignation and criticizing, what was done in my campaign. Yet, just in the first year of office, she winds up in a situation that, while I guess ostensibly legal, certainly doesn't. It certainly has in my opinion, has a negative appearance associated with it. She was the person who introduced the legislation that created the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. So I think being in the position that she's in now, you would want to be the role model for how people should behave and should perform in those positions. And Fresh Pack is hardly a role model for anything, in my opinion.
Given what U.S. Attorney then Ron Machin revealed about what went on in your campaign, do you think that the city or the council needs to do anything in terms of the laws to make sure that does not happen in future campaigns?
Yeah, what's interesting, Kojo, is I actually introduced legislation as mayor that would have prohibited people who were contractors with the city or were prospective contractors. They had bid on contracts above a certain level from contributing to political campaigns. And that legislation did not get through the council. So if they go back and pull out that legislation, in fact, the Washington Post editorial board actually made mention of that a few weeks ago in an editorial that they ran about Fresh Pack, saying they should go back to the legislation that I had introduced at the time and actually adopt it. that would make a huge contribution to closing some of these pathways that exist now.
Here is Molly in Greenbelt, Maryland. Put on your headphones so you can hear what Molly has to say, or ask Molly. You are now on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I just had a question for the former mayor. As a native Washingtonian with many senior citizen relatives in the district, I'm just curious what his thoughts are as to why the, I guess, legislation that he sought to pass around senior citizens being exempt from paying property taxes, why that was not moved forward or why it was voted down.
I don't know. You're referring to something that Councilmember Anita Bonds had spearheaded also. It wasn't even just legislation. It was in the budget. I had put in the budget for fiscal year, the fiscal year just finished at the end of September 30, $8.5 million that would have been allocated to be able to cover the property taxes. We want people to stay in the city, and that includes, of course, our seniors. And this was a way of being able to accomplish that. And I want to compliment Anita Bonds for the work that she's done on that and other senior efforts as well. In fact, she introduced a bill that would deal with financial exploitation of seniors in the District of Columbia. But at the end of the day, the council chose to take that out of the budget and redirect the money to something else, which I think was an ill-advised decision.
Molly, thank you very much for your call. What's next for you? There's been some speculation that you have been mulling a run for the council again. If you do, you've got to get a campaign up and running before the Democratic primary next spring.
Yeah, the primary is actually June 14th. So there are many people who have come to me and asked me to consider running for the council. I think people feel badly about what happened, and this was even before. I think people, Kojo, had concluded that there was nothing there. I mean, this had gone on for months and months and months after that press conference. And I think people had concluded that there was nothing there. You look at this poll that was done by the Washington Post, and 62% of the people in that poll said this thing should just be shut down, that it had outlived the point of having any useful value to the people of the District of Columbia. So even before this decision was announced last week, I had heard from many people saying, would you consider running for the council? And I said, I love public life. I love doing things for people. And it's a way of serving people. And there's people have talked about the at-large position. They've talked about the Ward 7 position, which is where I live. And I said, yes, I will consider doing that. And I said, there really are three options: Ward 7, at-large, and doing nothing, and doing my public service, which I would choose to do some other way.
I know you well enough to know that you will not be doing nothing. So why don't you just make the announcement right now, right here?
I haven't made a decision, Kojo, so I can't make an announcement on a decision that hasn't been made.
You didn't make your decision to run in the last election until pretty late, as I recall.
The 2014 election?
2014 election.
Well, that has been a pattern. If you think about it, I didn't get into the 2010 election until there were 4.5 months left. And that's part of the problem, is people say if you'd gotten in this earlier, probably a lot of these things wouldn't have happened, because it became very frenetic within those 4.5 months with you still trying to be the council chair. And frankly, the 2014 election, I got in with a few months left, probably 5 or 6 months left. In December, I think it was, when I announced that I was going to run for re-election. And there were some people who thought I shouldn't run. There were some people who thought I should. I felt, one, we had unfinished work to do that I wanted to complete. And secondly, I didn't want to be in a situation where somebody said, well, he didn't run for re-election because he cut some kind of deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office that if he didn't run, they would drop this whole investigation. I'm not realizing it. That there was nothing there, and I wasn't going to walk away with the possibility of that happening. Not even knowing at that time there was nothing there in the first place from their perspective. I mean, they had nothing, so they would have put it on the table, it seems to me.
People who know these things much better than I do say that your chances of being reelected would be much easier if you ran as a Ward 7 candidate than if you ran as an at-large candidate. I know Yvette Alexander disagrees with that, but what do you feel?
Well, you look at the last election. Even though there was voter suppression, even though in the Ward 7, vote, I just talked about the data from 14,800 down to 6,200. But you look at the results in Ward 7. You know, Cobra King pointed that out in an article that he recently wrote.
Never heard of him.
But he said, not only would I win in Ward 7, but he said, look at the comparisons in the at-large race, that I got 31,000 votes, which I should have gotten more, in my opinion, would have gotten more if people were not suppressed the way they were. And the person who the current incumbent got running for mayor got, I think, 18,000 votes or something like that. So I think I would stand a great chance in either one of those elections. And which one would be the better one? That's something I'll have to figure out in the weeks ahead.
I was just informed that Colbert King is a columnist for the Washington Post. Here we got an email from Kathleen, who writes, Mr. Gray states that he didn't know about the illegal use of money on his campaign. If he didn't know what his longtime close associates were doing, what does that say about his accountability and competence? If he wins the city council seat, isn't it likely that his employees/contractors would similarly engage in illegal activities? If indeed you do run, Mr. Gray, this is something that is likely to come up on the campaign trail.
I'd be happy to address that. There's no basis for the comment that was just made. First of all, I think you look at my track record, look at the way the city operated, and people need to remember I wasn't the mayor when this happened. There was never an allegation of any kind of impropriety during the entire 4 years that I was mayor of the District of Columbia. No questions raised, no allegations of anything. So while I appreciate the caller, raising that question or making that comment, there's just absolutely no basis for it.
Here's Denise in Washington, D.C. Denise, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I just want to say, first of all, that I never questioned anything regarding your record. I think you were the best mayor since Mayor Barry. And I just want to know, are you going to run for mayor again?
Well,
let's see if he'll answer you.
There is no mayoral election at this time. And one of the things that I've done, I've run for 3 positions. I've run for Ward 7, I ran for council chair, and I ran for mayor. I've never made a decision or taken a position on any future election. I've only focused on that which was on the table at the time. And the only thing on the table at present is are the council elections. So what's facing me is a decision about whether I run for the council or not. Any mayoral decisions will be made somewhere down the road at such point that that election would be on the table.
Denise, thank you for your call. Paula in Washington wants to know what you think about a major issue. Paula, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Kojo. Mr. Gray, I was wondering about this new Exelon purchase. I'm worried about nuclear electricity in my city, and
I should mention Exelon is heavily involved in nuclear energy. But go ahead. You want to know what Mayor Gray thought about it?
Yeah, I understand that the current mayor has said yes, and that yesterday there was a briefing, and only 2 members of our council were there. I don't think it was a good thing to do to get us involved with nuclear. And I'd like to know what Mr. Gray would have done if he had been faced by this situation. Would he have done what the current mayor did?
Well, first of all, I certainly would have ensured that there was full transparency, because the current mayor took a position of being against this, and then that was changed at a later stage to the position that she has at present. I don't know if the citizens of this city really know, the residents of the city know fully what's in it. And I think there needs to be continuing discussion. One has to rely upon the Public Service Commission, because they are the decision makers ultimately. And they voted against this deal for some of the very issues that you raised as well. What has changed, seemingly, is the availability of additional community benefits that, there would be money put into the new stadium, I think $25 million, and efforts to buy down some of the rates for people in the future, which would last until, I think, maybe 2018 or 2019, and a variety of other benefits that would be available to people in the District of Columbia. But the question for a lot of people is what's going to happen to the rates, the rates of electricity payment in the District of Columbia, and the nuclear issue that you raised. So I think that there's time. There's not a decision is not going to be made by the Public Service Commission until next year. And I think there should be an absolute, complete effort to try to make sure as many people who want to know have the information about what is really in this deal. And I think the public and many people in the public already have stood up. But I think there needs to be a continuing effort to make sure there's full transparency. And if people decide at the end of the day that this is a good deal, then they should support it. But I'm not sure people have enough information at this stage to be able to make that decision.
Paula, thank you for your call. We have time for one more. Darren in Maryland. Darren, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Kojo. I think it's absurd that Vincent Gray would sit there and complain and whine that he was a victim of a corrupt campaign when we know for a fact that he ran a corrupt campaign. To me, it's kind of what goes around comes around, and to sit there and whine about it, and I think is crazy. I mean, I can't even believe it.
Well, I'm not sure he said he was the victim of a corrupt campaign. What do you mean by that, Darren?
Well, voter suppression. He's alleging voter suppression that there was.
Well, I'll let him expand on that.
Well, I think the comment is ludicrous. First of all, I didn't run any corrupt campaign. I think anybody who's unbiased about this recognizes that. And I think the issue that I raised about voter suppression is that a press conference that was held by the U.S. Attorney and the U.S. Attorney's Office had the impact of having people stay home. And I think that was known when it was done. So I really don't choose to respond any further to that caller. Obviously, he has a point of view and he's entitled to it.
If you are to run for the council, what are the issues that would push you to do it? What's the work you feel that's left to be done from your time as mayor?
Well, one of the things that I focused on, Kojo, if you recall, was, I used the mantra of one city. And there were times when I had to explain to people what I meant by it. And that was to try to make sure that there were equal opportunities across the District of Columbia. And we worked hard to do that. When you see the Skyland Town Center now being built, when you see a brand new Ballou High School that has been built, a new H.D. Woodson High School that has been built, when you see the focus that was on early childhood education that is especially uniquely valuable for children who live on the east end of the District of Columbia, there's a lot of work that's yet to be done. And I think, being a council member at large or being a council member in Ward 7 would afford me the opportunity to be able to continue to promote those policies that I think will continue to grow the District of Columbia.
Vincent Gray, he's the former mayor of the District of Columbia. He's a Democrat. He also served as chairman of the D.C. Council, and before that was a member of the council representing Ward 7. Mayor Gray, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kojo. I appreciate it.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, how protests in Ethiopia are spilling over into political activism in the D.C. area. I'm Kojo Nandi.